Welcome to this intro episode of the Greens and Blues 14er podcast. We just wanted to take a few minutes to introduce ourselves and kind of share a vision for where we're hoping this podcast will get going. Zach, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, my name is Zach Simpson. I am a hiker, not a climber. I grew up in the great state of New Mexico in Albuquerque, grew up hiking. My first 14er was Mount Humboldt when I was 10 years old.
I didn't know
I'm
you
sure
did
that's,
Humboldt for your first one.
yes, that's a future episode.
Oh, man.
Being dragged up a 14er by your relentlessly hiking father. And I've hiked my whole life. I love the mountains of Colorado and I love talking about it. And that's why I'm here.
I love
How
it.
about you, Eric?
Yeah, so Eric Fredrickson, born and raised in Detroit, Michigan, and through some pathways through Ohio and Illinois, my wife and I moved to the Metro Denver area in 2010. And in the summer of that year, I had a buddy come out to visit, and he had hiked a bunch of 14ers. And so he stayed with us for a few days and said, "Hey, Eric, do you want to hike a 14er with me?" And I said, "Sure." What's a 14er? I had no idea what he was talking about. In Michigan, I think the highest point is like 2,000 feet. So I was used to lakes, not trying to get to the top of really big mountains. So we went up Long's Peak for my first 14er. I would not
Mm.
recommend that being someone's first 14er. But well, we made it and we survived. And soon after that, I was hooked. I fell in love with being in the Colorado outdoors and trying to accept the challenge of getting up some of these giant mountains. So that was my beginning of my 14er journey.
And our beginning together, so we are not related. Um, like many people, we actually met through the 14ers.com forum.
Mm-hmm.
I put out an ad for someone in summer of 2012 to hike Mount Harvard with
Harvard.
me.
Yep.
And Eric Fredrickson stepped up to the plate, and
Dragged you down.
we've been good friends ever since. So, and with that in mind, Eric, I do have a question for you.
Uh-oh. What's that?
Are you hardcore?
Oh man. I am most decidedly not hardcore. What about you?
I had a friend describe me as that once, but I think hardcore is relative. The reason we've decided to use the title, the Greens and Blues podcast, is due to probably our combined risk tolerance and the kind of hiking we like to do.
Mm-hmm.
If you go on 14ers.com's website,
Yep.
Bill Middlebrook has rated the difficulty and intensity of climbs based on a color system. And a class 5 hike, which is what requires hand over hand climbing, maybe even ropes. I believe that's a red.
I guess red. Yep.
That's a difficult climb. The easier hikes, class 1 and class 2 hikes, those colors are green and blue. And so we are a couple guys that like to hike the greens and blues. I have hiked, like I said, for a very long time, have done a fair number of class 3 hikes, but my sweet spot, because I largely hike alone, is class 2 hikes with a lot of route finding. Some people would think that's hardcore, but for a large swath of Colorado hikers, that's not even in the territory of hardcore. There should be no legends written about me, right? So going off trail is cool. A little bit of using my hands is cool, but for the most part, I'm a long hiker and not hardcore in my hiking persuasion.
But I would say I think you're drifting into at least expert territory, if not there already. I mean, you've summited 14er wise, you've summited in somewhere in the mid 30s, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, 38.
38, yeah. So I've summited 34. But when it comes to 13ers, you've summited over 100 of those, whereas I've got maybe 10 or so. So you've got a lot of good hiking experience and expertise. I mean, your route finding is your spidey sense. I think we probably both fit into the experienced enthusiast kind of a situation, and you more so than me, but I think we're both kind of in that realm where, like you said, we love hiking. We've done it a fair amount. You've done it a lot. And we love the experience, and we don't foresee ourselves stopping that.
Yeah, and I think both of us too. Part of our risk tolerance equation is we're dads.
Yeah.
And I know you have a similar vow to your wife. I made a vow to my wife that I would not make her a widower at some
That's right.
point. So I do my best. The tales of my what I did in my 20s when I did a lot of canyoneering in Utah scared my wife, and that's probably for another episode. But
We got a few
yeah,
that we're racking up here, I think.
yeah, oh, there, put that on the list. But
That's right.
yeah, I guess experienced enthusiast is just a great way to put it. I love hiking, and I've done a lot of hiking. Invariably, if it's a big peak in Colorado, I haven't climbed it, but I've hiked below it.
Yeah.
So
Yep.
there's a certain skill set. You know, if you've done more than a handful of 13ers, 13ers require a lot more route finding,
For sure.
a little bit more of a sense of how a mountain works and how geology works and angles. I think I'm pretty good at that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also, when I was a kid, I was out there because I had to be. And then at a certain point in my 20s and 30s, I had to rediscover hiking on my own terms. And for me, that was largely about just this feeling of being at one with the mountains.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that the more freaked out I am, the less I have that feeling. And so if I want to hold on to that experience, I tend to need to push it, but not really push it.
Yeah.
I feel like I know what your ability level is, Eric, but what's your favorite kind of hiking? What's your perfect day in the mountains?
That's a great question. Anywhere kind of in the 2 to 2+ range, a little bit of use of hands and light scrambling. Yeah, it's kind of my sweet spot, I would say. So, and I'm guessing somewhat similar for you too, although I think your risk tolerance might be a little bit more than mine.
Yeah, risk is an element of that, but the biggest part for me is wilderness.
Mm,
It's getting it's going somewhere where you're going to be surprised,
mm,
where there's an element of primitive, the raw,
mm-hmm.
the unknown there, where you get to see wildlife, elk or a coyote or a deer, or I've only seen a bear once. Yeah, that feeling of newness, and that combined with me feeling good
Yeah.
and me being in the right state of mind and being present and not, even if I am working through something in my head in my own life, being able to be there for that moment.
Yeah.
And also a good lunch. I'd say
You don't turn down a good lunch. I know that.
that is big. Having the right food is a big part of my joy. I would also say a light rain on the way down.
Oh, there you go.
It's always especially these, if you're walking along a road, it's a little dusty and hot.
No, it's a good
A
call.
little light sprinkle that wouldn't be too bad.
There you go.
So what are we here for, Eric? What do we want to talk about with our friends here?
Yeah. So I would say our focus, like you said, Zach, is going to be the greens and blues, the ones and the twos and the 2+. We'll talk about 13ers. We'll talk about all 14ers, and we'll talk about news topics of the day. We'll have guests coming in to share their perspectives. We'll go through individual mountain reviews and kind of talk about what our experiences have been and ask our listeners for experiences as well. But the focus is going to be the greens and blues, the ones that we are the most comfortable with, and probably the majority of hikers, I would imagine, are most comfortable with as well. And what are your thoughts?
Absolutely. Just want to share our stories and be another way for people to relate to mountaineering and hiking and the joys of being outside. If this is the way that people are interacting with this, is they're residents of Colorado or people that come to Colorado and hike, maybe this can be another resource for them. Something I should have mentioned earlier, I don't live in Colorado. So I live in Oklahoma, even though I grew up in New Mexico and Colorado, went to college in Colorado. I live in Oklahoma now. So I may give some special insight too on the demands of coming from sea level and trying to hike a mountain in a short period of time. Hint, it involves pain. Yeah, I think that just sharing our experiences and what we found great about mountains, and then what others might need to know in terms of trailheads, difficulty of route, the things they might encounter on them. 14ers.com is great at kind of giving you visual evidence, but sometimes it's a little different to have a story to go with it
For sure.
and a narrative to go along with that. And the fact that I think, like you, Eric, I have looked for a hiking podcast for years that made me happy, and I haven't found one.
Yeah.
And I'd like to give other people maybe an additional resource when they're trying to get jazzed about going hiking and thinking about those things.
100%. Yeah. And I think that's a great point. I mean, we, of course, we love talking about it, like we said, but we also want to engage with the 14er community. We want for there to be guests. We want for interaction through email, especially, and just to, like you said, have another resource for 14er aficionados to refer to when it comes to just about anything. We're looking forward to hopefully being a small part of that.
And you can always reach out to us at greensandbluespodcast@gmail.com or by sending up a flare.
Zach has his homing beacon with him, so you know always where to find him in Oklahoma.
Yeah, come to Norman, Oklahoma, and you can find me.
Well, one thing that you mentioned, you live in Oklahoma, but you're probably during the summers, you're probably in Colorado for what, a good 3 weeks at least.
Absolutely. Like probably many people in the lower Midwest, I make Colorado a destination of choice. I'm also a college professor, so I get my summers off. I make it a point to get up to Colorado as much as I can, and New Mexico, where I still have family. So I still hike in Colorado, New Mexico. I have a child. I have a little 10-year-old girl. I take her hiking. We go, our family goes camping. Our family goes to a cabin near Creed in the summer. So yeah, even though I am in Oklahoma, I'm able to find my way out as often as possible.
Well, and that just means that the experiences and the stories are just going to keep growing and just going to continue, which is an awesome thing.
Absolutely.
Well, we should probably give some thank yous on our way out of this intro episode. I would love to thank my lovely wife, Rachel, and my boys, Ty and Zach, younger Zach, for giving us the chance to do this crazy podcast. I also want to thank my buddy Travis for getting me hooked on 14ers in the first place and for being a great friend, and my buddy Carl for being an awesome friend as well and an inspiration as the co-host of the Backpacking and Blisters podcast, which you can find wherever it is that you found us.
I'd like to thank, of course, my wife, Kinsey, and my daughter, Cassia, but also I would not be a hiker, as I mentioned earlier, with Mount Humboldt without my dad. Probably like many folks, your contact with the woods is through your parents. My dad was an inveterate hiker. I'm sure this will maybe merit a longer story, but he hiked most of the 14ers in the 70s and 80s. And so his stories are very different than mine.
I'm sure.
And my dad really is the one that instilled the love of hiking and the discipline of hiking into me, what it means to hike and what it means to push yourself and the rewards of doing that. For him, it was a spiritual quest, and it's kind of become mine too. And then I'd like to thank the mountains of Colorado for being there.
I have a feeling they'll always be there.
long past me.
So I've got a question for you, Zach. Are you hardcore?
Well, as my daughter would like to sing in the words of Jack Black, you're not hardcore unless you live hardcore.
That's right. Thanks for listening and thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you later.